I was reading a book that I'd been recommended at school last year on leadership, and it started with the story about Lewis and Clark, part of American history, and them adventuring across trying to get to the Pacific, but they ended up at the Rocky Mountains and kind of lost their way. And basically they had an Indian guide that probably if they hadn't had him, they wouldn't have survived and told the story at the other end. But because of their expedition, the American people at that time started to dream about heading west and were quite excited about the tales and the stories that they had told from their journey. And the book of Ruth is one that I think Ruth herself is like an adventurer. She models going on a journey and following God. She's venturing into unknown territory. She doesn't really know what to expect. And as a child, my parents or my dad had pirated a whole series of cassette tapes, and I loved listening to stories on these cassette tapes. I think they were called Your Bible Story or something like that. I reckon there was over 20 of them, and I spent a lot of time as a preschooler listening to those stories, and they went all the way from Genesis through the whole Bible pretty much. But I think some of my favourites were the ones in the Old Testament, and I've been thinking about Ruth a lot lately, and at the time I think I thought of it as a bit of a kind of a romancy, happy ending type story, but in recent years I've been looking into it a bit more and hearing more about Ruth, and I just wanted to share the thoughts of what I've been studying in Ruth over the last couple of months. And when we look at the books in the Bible, Ruth has her own book, but what's interesting is there's only 2 books in the Bible that are named after women. One is Esther and the other one is Ruth. And Esther is a queen. She saves her people and it's quite dramatic, whereas I feel like Ruth's story is just a little bit more ordinary. There's not really any drama in it. Well, I guess there's drama in it, but it's not something big like what Esther did. She's just focusing on loving someone that she's with in the moment. She's loving her family. Her story is about leaving a legacy and a future for her family. So when I look at Ruth's life, or when we look at Ruth's life, we're seeing God using ordinary people in ordinary ways in their relationships and their sacrifices for each other. And it's just a story about God working in the background, because interestingly in Ruth, there's not a lot of references to God. There's only a few, and it's usually when they're praying or walking and talking amongst each other. But Ruth is someone that I think has really deep courage and lots of conviction during the hard times and the difficult things. And so I'm going to, bear with me, but I'm going to step us through some of the scripture as we go through and talk about it as I go along. So if we think about Ruth chapter 1, it's introducing us in verse 1, saying, in the days when the judges ruled Israel, there was a severe famine on the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. So we know that this is a difficult time in history, and a lot of the people have started to forget about what God had promised them because they're in a famine. Things are hard and they're tough. And I've got a quote, this is one for Toby, from Tolkien. In the second book, in the Lord of the Rings series, in the 2 Towers, the Faramir says, "It's long since we've had any hope, for the enemy increases and we decrease. We're a failing people and a springless autumn." And I think for Elimelech and his family living in Bethlehem during that time, it must have felt a little bit like that, that they're a failing people. And like Faramir, they've kind of lost hope. They don't know how they're going to survive. And so Elimelech decides to uproot his family and take them to Moab, looking, I guess, for better opportunities for his family. And we know from the story that things don't go that well for them in Moab. Elimelech dies, and then soon after, so do Naomi's sons. And she's left with her 2 daughter-in-laws. She's a woman alone with her daughter-in-laws. All of them are widows, and it's a patriarchal society. And in those times, that's a bit of a problem for them, because if they don't have a man to look after them, they're probably going to be really vulnerable and marginalised. They're going to be pushed to the outskirts. They're maybe not going to have any advocates when they need them. And so Naomi, in desperation, decides that she's going to return to Bethlehem. And if we'll take that up, I think Jeff's got some screen shot so that you can read along. But in verse 6, it says, "Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah." So we get an indication here that even though Naomi's in grief, she still believes in the blessings of Yahweh, that she's choosing to hope that things will be better in returning home to her people, and she leaves. But on the way, Naomi's daughter-in-laws, she stops and she says to them, and I think I've got the text up there, but I may not read them. She's worried about them. She says, "Go home to your parents, your family. There's probably nothing for you in Bethlehem," because she knows that they're going to be foreigners and not necessarily welcomed. "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you with kindness to your husbands and..." She says, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. "No," they said, "we don't want to go with..." "No," they said, "we want to go with you to your people." And so this, just going back up to the word kindness up there, this is the first reference in the Bible where, in the book of Ruth, where the Hebrew word, or hasad, and I probably can't say that right, is used. And it's used about 3 times in the book of Ruth. And it's one of those words that is like the key point in the book. It's one of those words that has a lot of English words to describe it, and here it's been translated as kindness. But it's one of those kind of loves that costs a lot. It's one of those loves where you've got to go above and beyond yourself. You're doing something that no one even has the right to ask for you, but you're giving it as a free gift. You're giving love in your actions. And what we'll see in this passage is that Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi all do this for each other. So Naomi continues to push them to leave and to go back. And Orpah decides to go back. So they weep together, and Orpah kisses her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. You should do the same." So what we're seeing here is that Naomi pushed her, and Orpah turned and went back to her people and her God. So she turned her back on Yahweh, but she also showed that she wasn't living a hesed life for Naomi. She was prepared to turn and go back. But what the Bible says there is that, but Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. So here Ruth is demonstrating that hesed kind of love in the first instance for Naomi. So Ruth says, and this, thank you kids for reading this part out, but Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave and to turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried with you. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." And so when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. So further up in verse 14, it says, "But Ruth clung to Naomi." She clung tightly. And the the Hebrew word for clung is, I think it said dabak. And that word actually means you've got a really deep attachment to something or someone. You're going to keep it close. It's like you're knitting and weaving it all together. It's also been described as being not having any separation between you, sticking to something like glue would stick to paper. And so it's conveying that sense of loyalty and commitment to another person. And this is what Ruth is promising to Naomi. She's saying, in refusing to go back to her own people, she's saying, "I'm prepared to stick with you like glue. I know that it's going to cost me. I won't see my family again. My culture, I'll be moving to a culture where I may not fit in, but I'm prepared to stick with you." So she knows it's not going to be easy, but she makes that choice. She knows that probably in Bethlehem there's going to be poverty for her. There's going to be, people aren't going to necessarily accept her because she's a Moabite. But she determines to do so, and she commits to stay with Naomi until they die. In that, I think she's also declaring that she's believing in God. She's acknowledging his love for her and that she's going to follow him and become one of his people. And possibly she already was living in Naomi's household. But I think this is what we could potentially call Ruth's superpower, is her ability to cling and stick like glue, because we see that the whole way through the story moving forward, is that no matter what's happening, she's sticking to Naomi and she's advocating for her, and she's working really hard for Naomi's good. So in verse 19, the two of them continued on their journey, and when they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. "Is it really Naomi?" the women asked. "Don't call me Naomi," she responded. "Instead, call me Mara. For the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer, and the Almighty has sent such a tragedy upon me?" So here, Naomi's pretty much sharing her raw suffering, her bitterness, and her struggles with Ruth, with the town. And Bethlehem probably wasn't a big town from what we know, and she is sharing how she feels, and yet the whole town is excited to see her back, to welcome their friend back into the town. And they're all talking about her. They're all talking about Naomi and this Ruth, the Moabitess, that's come. So then the news is spreading around town that they've arrived. There's not a lot of explicit references to God in the book, but the first is Naomi's acknowledgement. The first was her acknowledgement at the start that God was blessing Bethlehem and she was going to return. And then the second one is her now saying how bitter and sorrowful she feels. She's letting her community see her suffering, and then they're seeing the kindness of Ruth for her mother-in-law when she's at her low point. I think the book of Ruth is a story about ordinary lives, and I think I said that at the start, but it goes on, and it's about making decisions, raising your family, dealing with all the problems and doing business of daily life. And so it's all the kind of normal stuff. And Naomi, when she's feeling forgotten and forsaken by God, when she's feeling bitter and low, has Ruth, who embodies God's hesed, or God's all-consuming love for her. And sometimes maybe we're not feeling it, but there's someone or something out there that helps to move that faith in our lives. It's courageous, it's big and it's bold like Ruth's, and it's going to stick like glue until we really get it for ourselves. And then moving on, Boaz enters the story soon. So one day when the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Let me go to the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind anyone who is kind enough to let me do it." And we know that that's one of their laws, is to leave grain for widows and the poor people. Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters, and as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of the father-in-law Elimelech. And this is where sometimes we think the romance is starting in the story, but I actually don't know that it is, thinking about the culture of the time and what I've been learning from the story. But while she was there harvesting and gleaning, Boaz comes from Bethlehem to check on his field, and he greets the harvesters and he says, "The Lord be with you." So here is another reference to the Lord in the passage. And the harvesters reply back, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz says to his foreman, "Who's that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman replies, "She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes' rest." Boaz went over and said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, stay right here with us. When you gather grain, don't go to other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field. See which part of the field they are harvesting and follow them. I have warned the men not to treat you roughly. And when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well." She fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. "What have I done to deserve such kindness? I am only a foreigner." And again, we see that word hesed there. And Boaz says, yes, I know, but I also know everything you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband. I've heard how you left your father, your mother, your land, and you've come to live amongst strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done. So Boaz has probably already heard when he asks about Ruth. He's already heard about her because everyone in Bethlehem has been talking about Ruth and how she's been treating Naomi. What we do know about Boaz is that the words used to describe Boaz, the Hebrew words, actually refer to a warrior, but he's really not a warrior. He's probably more of a wealthy landowner. He's someone who had status in the community, and he was probably older than what we realised. But we know that he was a man of excellence, and he's another one like Ruth that had choices to make in this situation, because Hebrew law asked that they allow the widows and the destitute to glean in their fields, but they didn't have to open up the whole field to those people. They could just open up a portion of it. But what Boaz decided to do in that moment after seeing Ruth's kindness and generosity was he chose to go above and beyond that, to let her glean right behind and right alongside his workers. He gave her more than what she would have expected. He gave her greater than what she was entitled to. He also promised her protection, and he asked her workers to actually throw more food out for her. So he went above and beyond. And later that day when she goes home, he also fed her and let her eat with his workers. And there was so much food that he fed her, she was able to bring some home. And then as we go on in the book of Ruth, it says she worked all day and then she carried it back into her town and showed it to her mother-in-law. Ruth also gave her the roasted grain that was left from her meal. Naomi said, "Where did you get all this grain? Where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you." And Ruth told her mother-in-law about Boaz and the field. And she said, "May the Lord bless him," Naomi told her daughter-in-law. "He was showing his kindness," or he has said, "to us as well, and to your dead husband. That man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers." So here we see that Boaz, in his abundance, has also given them not only plenty of grain to cook with and prepare food with. On that first night that she's been gleaning, she doesn't even have to cook. He's provided an actual meal in the form of leftovers so that Naomi doesn't have to cook the food that based and grind the grain or whatever it is she had to do to actually have food to put on the table. So again, another example of him going above and beyond. I think this part of the story is where we see a turning point for Naomi as well. It's at this point where she's starting to see God's providence through Boaz and through Ruth. She's seeing that God's present in her life, and the generosity that both of them are giving her. Naomi knows that widowhood is hard. She's a widow, but she's also realises that for Ruth, once Naomi's old and she dies, Ruth will be struggling in Bethlehem as a Moabite, as a widow, and as someone that's a foreigner. She knows what that's felt like because she was in Moab as well. So she now, at this turning point, decides to make things a bit better for Ruth. So she, when we move on, Naomi then decides she's going to secure a marriage proposal or a situation for Ruth. So then the Bible goes on and it says, "On that day, Naomi said to Ruth, 'My daughter, it's time I found you a permanent home so that you will be provided for. Boaz is a close relative of ours and he's been very kind by letting you gather his grain. Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. Now do as I tell you, take a bath, put on perfume, dress in your nicest clothes, then go to the threshing floor. But don't let Boaz see you until he has finished eating and drinking. Be sure to notice when he lies down and go uncover his feet and lie there. He will tell you what to do.' 'I will do everything you say,' she replied. So she went to the threshing floor that night and followed the instructions of her mother-in-law." And I won't go into this part too much, but we don't actually know the precise significance of uncovering the feet and all the things that happened there. And there's a few different views on it. But basically, we know that it's some sort of signal to Boaz that there's some sort of marital request from Ruth and Naomi. It's a pretty risky plan to go somewhere where there's lots of other people and to essentially take it in your own hands to propose marriage. But she's boldly gone ahead and done that. The interesting thing here, which was fairly new to me, is that she followed Naomi's request, but she actually went a little bit further than that, because she says to Ruth, Boaz is a close relative of ours. He has been kind to you. But what we actually see down further along is when she makes her request to Boaz, she goes one step further and she asks him to be her. There's two laws, and I've got it written somewhere, but anyway. She basically puts two laws together. So the first one of being the redeemer is actually something that Boaz can do as a kinsman redeemer, but she puts the other one, which actually requires that he marry her. Now, he didn't have to because she wasn't directly related to him, but Ruth actually says, specifically in this setting, she asks Boaz to marry her and to make her children the children or descendants of Naomi. So he could have married her and left it at that, but she pushed it one step further, something that he actually didn't have to do. She asked him for a whole lot more. She asked him to give Naomi a child. So he wouldn't have even got that child, but he was able to further Naomi's lineage. Because for Ruth, she wants to give everything back to Naomi, everything she's lost. She wants to restore her. She wants Naomi to have a grandson and to have her line continue. So here we have Ruth. She's a Moabite. She's a widow. She's poor. She's got nothing other than Naomi. But she's got a lot of things going against her, but what she does have is that she's got faith, and she approaches Boaz and she asks him for more than what she ever deserves or what he even has to give her. And Boaz's response to that is, "The Lord bless you, my daughter. You are showing even more family loyalty now than you did before, for you have not gone after a younger man, whether rich or poor. Now don't worry about a thing, daughter. I will do what is necessary, for everyone in town knows you are a virtuous woman." So here Boaz is promising to protect Ruth. He's promising to do all he can to make sure that he can answer her wishes and respect her wishes. And in the next part of the story, and I won't go through all of that, but he goes through the process of basically turning that ancient system upside down, changing the rules for it. He arranges to marry Ruth, and then, as we all know, Ruth's family becomes Naomi's and is the descendants of David. And this is where it becomes really a powerful gospel story, because the gospel is really told here in the book of Ruth by three different people. None of them have met Jesus. They don't even know who he is, but they'll be part of their family tree. He'll be part of their family tree soon. We've got Ruth and we've got Naomi and Boaz. They all submit in different ways to a selfless life for each other and for God. And all of them are prepared to turn their lives upside down for each other, and their actions speak of what Jesus has done for each of us. They're pointing the way to Jesus, and that's where we can see like him working in the fingerprints in this story. Because in a way, the book of Ruth is Ruth's and Boaz's and Naomi's story, but in a way it's also the story of Jesus and his redemption. Jesus exceeded the requirements of the law when he came, and he died on a cross for us. And so I've been thinking about this in the context too of choices, and we all have choices, and it's easy to sometimes feel the discouragement of Naomi or Ruth or even Boaz. We can relate to all of them in different ways, and sometimes we're not even very good at it. But it's a reminder to me and to all of us that we do have a Redeemer who's there for us. And this year at school, our theme has actually been faithfulness. And my pastoral care class is year 11, and in our year 11 groups, we've actually been talking about faithfulness, and we're talking about how the way we do everything is the way we do anything. And I think Ruth is a good example of this, because everything we do, all those little choices that we make, add up to bigger and better things. Whether it's serving our community, whether it's the way we're working in our families and our jobs, but by doing what's right, advocating for each other, making choices that lead us closer to God and to each other, I think that is part of what we're also learning from the book of Ruth. And I wanted to also include here a bit of a passage from the Message in Romans 12, which I think also sums some of this up and is something that I like to try and live by, but I don't always do a great job at it. And it says, so here's what I want you to do. God helping you take your everyday, ordinary life. You're sleeping, you're eating, you're going to work. You're walking around life and place it before God. As an offering, embracing what God does for you is the best thing that you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings out the best in you. He develops well-formed maturity in you. I'm speaking to you out of deep gratitude for all that God has given me, and especially as I have responsibilities in relation to you, living then as every one of you does in pure grace. It's important that you not misinterpret yourselves as people who are bringing goodness to God. No, God brings it all to you. The only accurate way to understand ourselves is by what God is and what he does for us, not by what we are and what we do for him. And I've got another quote from Eugene Peterson, and it says, "Giving is the air in which we were born. It is the action that was designed into us before our birth. Giving is the way the world is. God gives himself. He also gives away everything that is. He makes no exceptions for any of us. We are given away to our families, to our neighbours, to our friends, to our enemies, and to the nations. Our life is for others. That is the way creation works. Some of us try desperately to hold on to ourselves, to live for ourselves, afraid to risk ourselves on the untried wings of giving. And the longer we wait, the less time we have for the soaring and swooping life of grace." I think Ruth knew this really well, as did Boaz. And I just want to leave you with those thoughts that we can use our everyday walking around lives for God, and we don't have to necessarily do big things, but it's about clinging to the people that are important to us, the community that's important to us, and serving where we are.